Hello everybody. Welcome to a episode of Actual Play Broadcast. Today we are not talking we're not running an actual session. We are continuing our discussions on, being a GM or being a player. This time we're talking about being a player and what it's like during the character creation process and things to help with that.
Yeah, character creation, session zero, coming into a game in general. You know, where the GM is figuring out what to run and all of that. Are we talking more about, as a player buying into buying into the concept of the game as well as making sure you're picking something that's going to be fun to play or making something that's suitable to the game as well as some other like session zero type stuff, like you know limits and veils or lines and veils and stuff like that. If safety tools are your thing,
Yeah. Um so I think we should start with the concepting a character. Some people, including people in our play group, enjoy a specific type of character concept and will play that character concept in every system that they can.
yeah,
Um, this isn't a bad thing. It's actually rather easy for GMs to go, well, this individual is not going to like this system, not going to participate in this system as much because the trappings that the player enjoys are not there.
yeah,
Um, Now, you as a player, if you're inflexible on that, then there may be times where you are not going to enjoy a system and or you might sit out because the system that's being played just doesn't mesh with your character concept. So that becomes a question of what matters more to you, the fantasy that you want to enjoy or playing in the group.
well, and I think a part of that there is something I notice with a lot of players who are very attached to a very specific type of play style. Oftentimes have a hard time um, accepting what the I don't want to necessarily say the fantasy of the game, but buying into the concept of the game in the sense that, let's say, what's a good example? Um, I can't think of exact systems offhand, but let's say you have somebody who is in something very specific, like magic, uh, and the system you want to play does have magic in it. Um, or the system that the GM is running does have magic in it, but maybe magic is very, very volatile and is generally a downward spiral type of story. It's not about becoming a super powerful wizard. It's about the temptations of power and how it corrupts. Um, some players have a hard time coming to terms with that because they think magic automatically equates being powerful. But in this system, that's not what it means. And so they may hard bounce off the system. So when you're a player and you're coming to a system, it is important to keep uh a level of neutrality and to kind of to a degree extract expectations from engaging with the system. Um so that you can actually see what the system is trying to present and what the expectations the system has. Um because I've seen it a lot in a variety of different ways. Um, like in World of Darkness, switching between game lines. Some people who have maybe played a lot of Werewolf and then start playing Mage uh, may address combat in very different ways because they have different expectations of what the power fantasy here is, and those games are very different from one another in that case. Um, So, it's fine to be somebody who has a very preferred way of playing a game. And if you're not really into games where they really change the essence of that fantasy or whatever, that's fine. And like, that's fine to not like those. Um, but as Brandon was saying, if your higher priority is to play with everybody, um, one of two things needs to happen. You need to change your expectations and just accept it for what it is, or maybe I'm sounding a little crazy here, but maybe step outside your comfort zone. Maybe take this opportunity to try something new. Maybe you find a play style that you actually really enjoy outside of that normal. You know? Um,
And it's never like a bad thing to have a concept that you enjoy. It usually makes it easier for you to like build a character generally because it's like, oh, well, I know what I want and I know what I'm going to look for and I know what I'm going to grab. Um, and if that doesn't get stale for you, well, good for you. I mean, that's a good thing. But it does mean that depending on your concept, you get a little more tied down when it comes to what systems you can function in. Um, Using the example of magic, if a magic system does not exist in a game, then if that's a turnoff, and you're like, well, I don't want to play this system because I can't, throw fireballs at people. Um, then I mean that's just a system that you can't play because of the limitation that has been brought on. Um, and you know that kind of stinks, especially if you want to play with all your friends. But that's the first like trapping that you can run into is that if you're married to a concept, not all systems are going to be for you. Just unfortunately how it functions. However,
yeah.
um, talking about concepts at a much broader scale, what do you want to? A lot of games include this in the character creation process, where it's, hey, pick a concept. Um, and it gives a broad notion of what that means. Uh, Allow us to kind of like simplify that because a lot of books are like, oh, think of a way that you want to play, think of what you're trying to do, blah 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 blah.
Yeah. And I
To
think part of this problem is this kind of thing that these books do, which I mean, I can't blame them too much because you can't tailor these rules to fully cover every player type. But there's a lot of players out there you can't just go to them and say pick a concept. And you might be one of these players where a book says pick a concept, and you're like, well, I don't even know what the concepts are. Like, what do I don't even know anything about the game. What do I do with that? Because I know I myself am guilty of it. They say pick a concept, and I'm like, cool, I'll do that later. And I'll start reading through the rest of character creation, and I'll just start looking at all the options, um, and start looking at how the different systems work. And then I will eventually decide on concept. Uh, some players don't work this way, obviously, though. Some of you may say, pick a concept and just immediately, you know, I want to play whatever the equivalent of a rogue is. And that's that. And that's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. Um, Others will look at a system and it's just like, well, I want to play some sort of like staunch defender. I myself am guilty of usually playing some sort of punch me in the face, I'm the tank. But that is for a multitude of reasons. Primarily because I don't usually have to roll defense as a tank, with the exception of some systems.
Yeah.
Um, and these are fine concepts, but you could change that up a bit more. I want to be John Wick is a valid concept. Is you make your character like John Wick. Now, mind you, if you're just playing John Wick in that game, it's gonna be a little. Uh, it can be a little boring for both you and the other players, because
Yeah. A
you
lot
know
of players and GMs may not say anything. They may not tell you no, but
they'll roll their eyes.
there's a lot of people who really do not like it when you come to the game with a character that exists from another property and you're just playing that character in whatever the game is. Um, I know I personally do not like that. If I have a player come to me and they are like, uh, I want to play, I don't know, I just want to play Kratos. I'm gonna be like, okay, so is that you want to play a character inspired by Kratos, or are you saying you want to play Kratos? And they're like, I want to play Kratos. Okay, well, we're not really doing that here. You can play something that is inspired by Kratos. How are you going to take that and make it your own? And make it your own character? Is generally how I like to frame that. Not,
Yeah.
doing it to be mean or anything, but I
Also,
don't run games that way.
yeah. Also,
Just
what
put it that way.
version of Kratos are you playing? Are you playing
True.
the original God of War series, or are you playing the Valhalla series?
Dad of boy.
Yeah. Because those are two very different characters, and
Yeah.
which is an important thing to point out. I would say one is a better developed character than the other,
True.
and actually has interesting story arcs.
Yeah. But that's I think that kind of like also connects to another point is that when you're making a character concept, your character concept needs to vibe with the rest of the group. Um Obviously some character concepts in general are more suited to group play than others. For
Yeah.
example, even new people may be familiar with this, but the concept of the edgy loner rogue who is does not talk to anybody, sits by himself, does not engage with anybody, has this dark brooding backstory that he refuses to share, and generally just seems to do everything in their power to not be a team player. Well, if you're playing D&D and the opening to the game is we all meet in the tavern and everybody is at one table and your edgy rogue is by themselves refusing to interact with the rest of the players, how is your rogue supposed to be a part of the party?
Yeah.
How are you supposed to join this group? But even in
Because
situations where you're already in the group, how are you supposed to cooperate if you are not cooperating? Because here's the thing, conceptually, for like a book, that might work where you have total control over all the characters and you can make the characters close that gap. But I'll tell you right now, me as a player, if you're playing that guy who doesn't want to interact with people, I'm going to try maybe one or two times to interact with you. And if nothing changes there, I'm done. I'm not going to continue to push it because it's not worth it.
And like a part of it is you could still play that character. You just have to have a way to connect to the party. There needs to be a level of, and this is something I see a lot of new players run into, is some people get so involved in their concept they lose out on connecting to the other players and the GM at the table. So this edgy loner rogue is a concept, but how do you get it to connect to the party? My first thought in this scenario is have them act like the big brother of the group. Like, they're the ones that are going to sit there and try to shoulder more burdens. They're going to sit there. It's just like, hey, this person needs something. I need to get it for them. And, like, yeah, they could be, like, brooding. You can still have your brooding character, but, have a way for them to connect.
Yeah.
Because if you just have. Because, like, fucking. If you look at Lord of the Rings and the Fellowship of the Ring, Aragorn was the brooding ranger for like the first half of it until they got to Rivendell.
Well, I mean,
And
even
then
before that, though, like his introduction is brooding and kind of loner vibe. But then once he meets with the hobbits and he gets them to explain what the hell's going on and that like Gandalf hasn't shown up and everything, he realizes these are the people he's supposed to meet. He doesn't explain everything to them. He's not an infinite font of wisdom and is doing everything for them, but like he starts taking care of them and making sure they're safe and everything. Um and obviously helps them on the travels down the road. He definitely opens up more once they hit Rivendell and they go beyond, but you like you were saying, Brandon, you've got to interact with the party. You've
yeah,
got to have a reason for being there. If you're not helping the party in a direct sense more than just I hang out in the shadows and then stab people when they have their back to me, like cool, you're technically helping in combat, but that's like really the bare minimum here. Need a little bit more from you than that.
and
Um
sometimes this
yeah.
can be a fault of not just the players. Sometimes the GM just says, "All right, everyone, make a character, and then we'll meet next week." You meet next week. All right, you're all in a tavern.
Yeah.
That's
But it's
yeah,
important to remember, like, while the GM is supposed to be watching out for, shall we say, problematic character concepts that may not fit, um, they also shouldn't have to be the police. Like, you as a player, that's kind of your responsibility. And, like, we can touch on social contract later, but
yeah,
as a player, that's kind of your responsibility to pay attention to what everybody else is doing and to make something that's going to vibe with the rest of the group. If the entire group is like, we want to make a group of people that are, potentially not necessarily really religious, but are like really into doing the right thing. They're very into the moral correctness and helping people and all of this. If you make somebody who's going to be explicitly evil, who is with the party out of convenience, that's going to be a lot harder of a sell for why is this character in this party.
yeah,
Your scale on what's going to be acceptable may look more something like, well, I'm a mercenary generally. My morality is a bit more flexible. But maybe that's what the party needs sometimes is somebody who, when everybody else doesn't want to get their hands dirty, he's there. And it's best to let him do it and just not think about it. And you can do that without being evil,
yeah,
right? So you want to make something that is going to vibe with the party, both personality wise and obviously like mechanically. We could have entire discussions about you know filling in niches and specializations and cohesion in that way where you're not stepping on other players' toes, stealing their spotlight and stuff from a mechanical perspective. But, you know, none of this means your characters have to be best friends with each other either. You can have tension within the party and stuff, but that is absolutely something you need to discuss with the other players if you want to do that kind of thing. If you just want to drop having random tension with the other players and expect them to be okay with that, like that needs to be a discussion because some
yeah,
people are like, you don't know. Well, I mean, maybe you do know. But if you're playing with randoms online, you don't know what they've got going on in their life. Or even some of your friends, you don't know what they've got going on in their life. Maybe they're having a lot of drama at home. And they don't want to have the inter-party conflict because they feel like they're getting that every day in their life, where everything's like a constant argument and shit. Maybe they want a party who is all on the same page, because
Yeah.
that's the escapism they need. So it's
Yeah.
important to have these conversations and to be thinking about these kinds of things. You don't need to, have a psychological profile of your entire party, but if you want to pick a concept that you think is going to be fun because it's going to have, the right kind of antagonism between your character and another character, be like, hey, is it okay if I do this? Because, our characters are probably going to argue a lot. And if they're okay with that, then cool, go with it. But yeah, I mean, that's the big point here is communication.
And like,
Because, yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, you go.
And like as an example of this, there are like depending on the player, they're okay for you to be like, hey, we're gonna have inter-party conflict. For example, I'm one of those people that for the most part, like as long as it's makes sense, I'm down for that inter-party conflict. An example of this is that at one point, Earthstyle was going to start shit with Tilk. And me as a player, I was down for it. It just the why is the part that I was trying to figure out. That never came to be, but it wasn't a discussion that was really had. But I'm also more seasoned, so things like that I tend to expect. If you're like a good group of friends and everyone, can take jabs at each other, doesn't typically end up being an issue, but you do also need to respect other people's boundaries. If they're like, okay, I see what you're going for, I'm not down for it right now. No, I need you to not. Then that's a conversation that can happen. And I think this is a good chance to segue into something that I think is very important to building out a party that I wish more games had something set up to do, but inter-party connections.
When I can't believe I forgot it. Cause when I asked, like, if there was anything we need to review, I completely forgot that we did Decima.
We did Decima.
Which is perfect for that.
Yes. Decima is great. It's a great facilitator for that.
Yeah.
Some books have their own way to set that up. An example would be, off the top of my head, is Daggerheart. Daggerheart has something specifically set up for that, but it's a picked list of questions. I don't know if that's improved since it's left its beta version.
Yeah, I'll say that I generally prefer something that has a degree of randomness to it because it almost feels like too easy or maybe like low hanging fruit or whatever to cherry pick questions from a list or anything like that, or to go down a very like formulaic way of doing things.
Yeah.
Having that degree of randomization, I think, helps add a little bit of a spice and uniqueness to it.
Which I think is perfectly fine for it to not have that, but having it be random definitely I think is more fun. Especially like from an improv perspective.
Yeah.
I myself think Decima is a great solution to it. There are a few questions in there that, some players are not going to be comfortable doing. We did Decima for a to be announced game. And one of the questions that popped up every once in a while that everyone was just like, "Now we're just gonna let's get a different card," was like love interest stuff. Not that our party probably can't RP everyone being well, not everyone, but individual characters being in a relationship or having a crush on one another. We just as like people are like, that's
Yeah, we have
not
a
nearly as Not
We
nearly
have
as
several
interesting.
people in the group who aren't like super into it, for various reasons.
Yeah.
Which is fine. Like I, as a player, am totally down for romance RP, but like there's definitely a preference on who is going to be the person I'm going to be doing that RP with.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
so
and I'm happy with like the replacements from Decima. We're just gonna keep singing Decima's praises. Look it up.
we'll
So
do a proper review at some point. We're not going to go too far into it, but
yeah. But some of the things that were traded
yeah,
out, like we had one that was just like, oh, you have an attraction to this player. Why is it? What did it? And they're like, next. And instead they got you're envious of another person's success and have trouble hiding it. Why weren't you successful?
yeah,
And that's much more interesting because it allows for, and since Decima is a collaborative thing that you can do, you could sit there and go, "Hey, are you okay if we have this interplayer conflict?" Whether or not it pops up a lot is going to be a different question. Um, but like it establishes a relationship between multiple characters. Sometimes it does suck, however, that if you're the character that has the most fleshed out story, people are going to keep picking you.
yeah.
Um,
There's also a degree of people may not realize how much a certain character has been picked, and will kind of end up picking the same character
yeah,
back to back. Or in
that's
general,
right.
if a character just seems more approachable on the concept, more characters are more likely to approach that person. And depending on your game and like how it's set up and the rationale for it, you may be okay with that. That may be a totally reasonable thing, If you have a character who's very much like glue of the party, uh, maybe they are like kind of the ties that bind of the party.
Yeah.
Uh, and everybody's more connected to them than with each other. It makes sense. But you may decide, no, I want a group that has a little bit more multifaceted dynamic. Um, Decima at least is set up in a way where you can kind of modify it as needed, and you can, you know, add additional
Uh,
rounds of things to
and
diversify.
another thing that Decima does is it has not just interplayer relationships, but also has relationships to a location and relationships like as the group's dynamic. Um, this is good for like establishing, hey, you guys are like a band of mercenaries that have been working together for a bit now. And
Yeah.
now you're stepping into the serious shit if you want to look at like more like D&D or Pathfinder-esque games. Our situation was a little specific, but was still, even with how specific it still functioned perfectly.
Yeah. It's like even outside of using Decima, like obviously you do not need an engine or a system or anything to do these things.
No.
This is something you can all do off the top of your head, you know. And I highly recommend doing it, especially if you and your group are really over this. We're gonna start without anybody knowing each other. Like if you're going to play a game where everybody knows each other, take that extra step and figure out ahead of time how do you all know each other, and like do this like before they actually make character sheets or very soon after they've made their characters. Um because that can inform a lot of things, and they may learn things about their characters that they didn't necessarily plan on being there.
Yeah.
Um, because you sit there and you decide like what's your connection to this location, and like I don't know if a location is like a fucking bowling alley. Well, maybe some of them have skills related to that, or maybe like in the talking of your connection with this bowling alley because you all go bowling regularly, maybe you find out, oh well, Tim is always the one who gets the drinks from the counter because tim's Tim's older sister works the counter or something, and now that adds extra flavor. It further anchors into the world, it furthers the dynamic. And like it's a small thing, but it kind of shapes how people interact and how they are connected to the greater world. because I guarantee you, if you sit there and you say you all know each other and you hang out together, the bowling alley probably doesn't even exist. But now that you've had that conversation, the bowling alley exists, and one of the characters has a sister, and if like stuff's going on, well, maybe now he has concerns about his family instead of just we're all conveniently orphans or all of our families are conveniently far away and have nothing to do with the plot. Um, but you can also have those inter-character relationships to be like, well, how did you all come together? And then, ask those questions. Here's what you know about so and so's character. How does your character feel about them? Is there any problems they have? Are there things they like about them? Stuff like that. You don't need a system to referee that kind of thing. You can sit there and do it. Obviously, it's having a system that gives you guidelines is definitely nice, but if you have a general idea of these types of questions to ask, you can do it on your own.
Yeah.
But I would definitely, well, like I said, we'll go into more detail in a proper review, but definitely recommend Decima if you do want a guideline for it. Now you need a tarot deck, but
And there's plenty of resources for that online.
there is. If you buy the physical copy of Decima, you can get it with the tarot deck. It will come with one. I'm pretty sure. I don't know. I bought the PDF.
Also, not a place on your shelf, huh?
I mean, let's be honest. It's like a 20-page book.
Yeah.
Like, unfortunately, I wouldn't notice it on my shelf because all the other books are several hundred times its size. It'll be a tiny little gap in between two fucking rule books. Well, between two GM books, really.
Yeah.
But I mean, the rest of that's for checking my review stuff. I'm not going to get into how we went about it. Yeah.
One working with these character concepts, it's good to also keep in mind everyone else's concept. Like the big thing that we're saying, like what we're saying in a lot less words, is you're not operating in a vacuum. You're not creating a character in a vacuum. There is a world that you need to be aware of. That is either roughly created by the GM or a group of people that you're already operating with or that will be operating with. If each one of you decide to make an edgy rogue who likes to brood in the corner, nothing's going to get done. Nothing will get done. I promise you.
And this is also why I like bring up buying into a game, and it's something I like. I don't explicitly say to players, but because I know a lot of players don't like to be preached at or told what to do necessarily. But it's a very real point that you should be aware of the game. What is the setting that we're playing in? How does that inform my character? And so I always make a point of making players aware, if this is your character, this is how you're going to interact with the game world and how the game world's going to interact with you. Because here's the thing. I will say it's very common in people that have only played D&D or Pathfinder that they assume a general high fantasy setting and that they can play whatever they want. And when then they encounter friction in regards to those things, they get angry. Some players may sit down at a table and GM might be like, this is my homebrew D&D game. And player immediately assumes, I don't know, they want to play an Aarakocra, let's say, warlock or whatever. And they want their patron to be a great old one. They want like an Eldritch Horror patron or whatever. Well, they've decided that before they know anything about this homebrew setting, and then the GM comes back and it's like, that's not going to work. There are no Aarakocra in my setting. and there are no great old ones in my setting. Now the player might be annoyed. Some players are like, "Oh, okay," and they move on because they acknowledge, "Oh, well, I didn't know what the setting was." Uh, but some players get annoyed because they're like, well, why can't I do that? It's an option in the book. It's not fitting the game setting though. Or another example is people who are like, they're playing in a dark fantasy setting that is, maybe they think magic is scary. Very common trope. Magic is scary. People treat anybody with magic as potentially dangerous. They don't want to interact with them, or maybe openly hostile towards them. If you have a player who's going to play a wizard and it's like, okay, so you understand, like, this is how the world treats magic, and they say, yeah, sure. And then they get upset when people treat their character poorly for using magic or outright hostilely. That player hasn't bought into the game. They have not bought into the concept of the game and like what it means to play a wizard in that setting. As a player, it's your job to understand the game world you're going to be playing in. There's a degree of, if your character is not supposed to know what you're going to be encountering, that's one thing. But there should be a degree of the GM is telling you what the game world is like, as well as you asking questions. Because also the GM may not be able to think of everything all the time to, let everybody know about every specific detail that they need to know. So if you're not sure, ask these questions. Oh, we're playing in this specific city and the campaign is going to be centered around this city. Well, I'm playing a rogue, so GM, if say, I get attacked or whatever, and so I pull out a dagger to defend myself, what's the law in the city? Am I going to get in trouble with that? Or if I go pickpocketing in a particular part of town, is the Thieves Guild going to get mad at me? Is there a Thieves Guild? Like, be thinking about how the world is going to interact with your character and what things your character would know about the world and how they would instinctively interact with it. And this is kind of what I refer to as buying into the game world or buying into the game. It can be this very character level thing, or it can be a very meta thing with you as a player buying into the concept of playing this system and what does that mean for you mechanically as well as enjoyment wise. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that, Brandon.
Buying into the system is a concept that does need to happen. The thing that I have personally witnessed is buying into playing the game. Not even just the system, not even just the world. I have I had a situation where I was running a D&D game, and I had an individual. Now, mind you, this individual was not the most socially adept, is how I'll put it. And we sit down, we're playing the game, everyone's RPing, most of the group is having a good time. This individual, in the middle of a conversation, throws his hands up in the air and go, "Oh my God, can we please just fight something?" And I calmly inform them that this is a tabletop RPG. It is not, you're not playing Devil May Cry. There's going to be conversations. And the way that I like to run things is I like a good amount of RP. There's not always going to be combat. His response was, why can't it be like Final Fantasy, where I could just go and fight things all the time? I imagine they were referring to Final Fantasy 13. I will not input on that.
I'm not sure which Final Fantasy they're really talking about. Even 13 has cutscenes in it. It's not all fighting all the time.
Yeah. And that's what I informed them. And they're like, "Well, this sucks." And I'm like, "Well, then you can leave. If you're going to disrupt everyone and you're not having a good time, then leave." He grabbed his stuff and he walked out. I think he also drove away, which was a problem for his brother that was there with him, who was having a good time.
Oof.
Yeah. He's just like, so he's my ride. Let me figure out if he's going to just split. Um, I'm like, do that. We'll hold up for you. We'll go to a 5 minute there. Um, and that was rough for like that. That wasn't rough for me. I was just like, don't like it, get out. Um, but for a number of people there, that was their introduction to, hey, not everyone's on the same page as you.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's
because
also a really good example of if you're the one person not having fun or whatever, you should understand that the group, GM and the entire group are by no means required to bend over backwards for your enjoyment. Like there are some players who do hear a lot of this about making sure everybody is comfortable and everything, but they take that to mean that it's everybody's job to, make sure everybody is cool and everything. And that's technically correct, but they take it to an extreme and they expect things to change for them. Um, when when it becomes an issue of my fun versus your fun, but your fun is literally like 80% of the group and you're only 20% of the group. Uh, Depending on what it is, they don't have to bend over backwards for you. They can do like as you did, Brandon, and be like, no, this is what we're doing. If you can't buy into that, you can't enjoy that. I'm gonna have to ask you to leave.
and like it's one thing if it's like, hey, this is a trigger for me. This is an issue that gets brought up a lot. That I am personally feeling like attacked by. That's one thing. Like that's a different conversation that can be had in, I think, a future recording. Um, but if it's just like, hey, I'm not having fun because of the way that everyone else is playing. Well, everyone else is having fun, so either adjust, try to find your fun, or leave. And it's all right for you to be like, hey, I don't like my concept with this group. I don't like what's going on. I'm out. That's fine. You're not a monster
Yeah,
for like going, I'm not having fun. I don't want to play no more.
I've left a session 0 because I could immediately tell I was not going to enjoy the group. Um, I've had to do it a couple times realistically. Um, because online groups is a crapshoot. But
Yeah.
it's how it is. Your fun is not universal. There are absolutely other people out there that have fun the same way you do. Um, but whatever group you're in is not obligated to bend over backwards for you.
And that's one of the key things to keep in mind is like the goal of this is to have fun. If you're not having fun, seek a dialogue, see what can be done. If it's a case of you want a specific thing that the rest of the group does not care for, then likely it's not going to happen. And then you need to make the decision of, well, is this like a make or break for me? If it's a break, then you're out. Especially like with online groups, because online groups are a bit, I'm going to say, colder on reception of like, hey, can we do this instead? Um, that being said, I myself haven't joined a lot of online groups. I have multiple groups of people that I know that I jump around with. Um, so that's not really like a big deal. Um, so it's a thing to keep in mind. Like, create a character that you're going to create a character concept that you're going to enjoy, that is aware of the setting, and that is you as a player are aware that they need to mesh with the group in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Um, and like we've given some tools and suggestions on how to get about that. Let's talk more about your character. and like making a character, not like making the character like in a system, but when you're like designing this character in your head. A number of people, especially with the rise of certain popular role-playing groups, have it in their head that to distinguish your character or for you to be a good role player, you need to do a funny voice.
Oh, yeah, no, no.
That's not
You
true.
don't. Yeah, you don't. Look, if you're setting the expectation that you have to do a voice, you're setting your expectation too high. You don't have to do a voice. The only time you have to do a voice is when you want to. Because I mean, I've had times, if you've listened to the Outfair recordings, I've had times where I've done voices, and then maybe a session or two later, I'm like, I have to take a break from doing the voice because my throat bad.
I'm dying.
Yeah. It's, and sure, you could argue, oh, but the consistency and everything. Yeah, fair. But ultimately, it's a hobby. You're doing this for fun. If people are demanding you to voice act, where you have to like do a different voice from your normal talking voice and all of that, and that's an expectation they have for you. If that's something you're not down for, don't play with that group.
Yeah.
Because that's a crazy expectation. That is outside the norm. People that are trying to make that the norm are getting way too, shall I say, elitist about the hobby. You don't need to do all that.
Yeah. And like doing a voice is fine. You're able to do a voice. Things to keep in mind, because this is a pain point that I know has come up for a few people that I know. You don't have to feel obligated to do a voice if everyone else is doing a voice. If you're the only one doing a voice, then it becomes a question of, well, now I just feel silly. You're allowed to feel silly. The question is, are you having fun doing it? Is the answer yes? Keep going. If the answer is no, now I feel uncomfortable, then stop.
I've been the only one doing a voice. Well, no, technically kind of. I was doing a voice when one other player was doing an accent,
and that's
which you
another
could
thing.
kind of argue is doing a voice, but like,
Yeah.
personally, I didn't feel silly. It was very fitting. For anybody who knows Vampire, I was playing a gargoyle. So I made the character thinking I was going to be doing very little talking, and after 2 sessions, I was proved very wrong. And I had some regrets.
Yeah.
I did a very gravelly voice, and
And
oh boy.
and when I say doing a voice, I am also referring to doing an accent, because it's something that you're doing with your voice.
Yeah.
I
only say it didn't really feel like that they were doing a voice because I mean, it very much sounded like that player's normal voice, but with an accent. Like they were just doing a very Australian type of accent and verbiage.
Oh no.
But it was their normal voice, so it didn't really feel like they were doing a voice. But yeah,
and like that's part of the process. If your concern is, oh well, my accent or my voice isn't going to be very good, no one's is. No one's accent or voice is very good, except for people that actually speak in that accent on purpose.
Like, I'm just gonna tell you now, if your bar for expectation or performance is Critical Role voice acting, you're literally comparing yourself to people that get paid to do that every day. Stop it.
Stop it.
You're not going to go to, you're not going to go into the NFL and be the one amateur player and be like, why am I not as good as these guys? I don't know. Probably because you're not a professional with coaches and training and literal years of practice.
Yeah.
Lower the expectation, guys.
Pull
it's a hobby.
It's a hobby. Calm down.
Do what's fun.
Yeah. And that's one of the ramifications that Critical Role had, is that you had a bunch of these voice actors who were very talented in voice acting, doing accents and voices. And, 5e and tabletop RPG space jumped in popularity for that. So now people look at that and go, "Oh, that's the bar." No, that's not. That's I mean, it's a bar. It's the high rung of the bar.
I mean, absolutely take inspiration.
Yeah.
You know, it if Critical Role is what has motivated you to play, that is totally fine, you know. But just don't hold yourself to that standard. It's not realistic.
No.
Um, you
And
know, there's definitely a lot of positive things to learn from them playing this game. But it, do not treat their table as expectations for what, you know, well, D&D is supposed to be. D&D, the only takeaway from that table is D&D is supposed to be fun with your friends and telling a story and playing a game. That's what it's supposed to be. They have professional talent. They get paid to be there. So they're almost always there unless they have another job. So they're making hella money. They have a high production value set. So this also goes for you GMs. You don't need to do the whole battle mat thing that Matt does. Okay? That's insane. I've rarely played on a battle mat, let alone anything with 3-dimensional figures on it. Okay?
Yeah. They painted themselves as insanity, where Marisha has talked multiple times where Matt's like in his little cave sculpting shit or putting it together. They paint it as like, you know, that's kind of wild, man.
Yeah. They have insanely high production value. And because of that, there are a lot of affordances along with their professional talents.
Yeah.
That is not a standard you need to hold yourself to as a player or as a GM.
Are we telling you that you are not allowed to get a fog machine and have a 3D battle mat? No, we're not saying that you shouldn't do that. If you could do that,
more power to you. If you want to aspire, that's fine. Aspiration is fine. But saying I need to perform at this level to really enjoy this is not healthy.
Yeah.
There's aspiration and then there's unhealthy standards.
Yeah, like Matt has 3 decades of fucking DM experience. And then the players, although being new, are talented voice actors and get paid essentially to RP constantly. So, no, don't hold yourself to that standard. Please don't. Like, it's unrealistic, and I think it will harm the hobby. And they don't even tell people to perform at that standard. It's just what people pick up on.
Well, I will say that's a very, and it kind of goes in with being a player as well. It's a very common thing is people will come to the hobby, they'll look at a system sometimes, and they'll say, what does playing this look like? What is the average like play experience of this? And some people are in the know enough they will go look at actual plays. And the unfortunate nature is if you go look for actual plays of D&D, Critical Role is right at the top. And like while the core gameplay is D&D, obviously, the level of the experience is not representative of the average experience of playing D&D.
Yeah.
But it is a thing with players. I know I've done it where I've picked up a new system and I'm like, okay, this is interesting. Reading through the rule book, I understand what the rules are saying here. I understand this. I can infer some things, but realistically, like some rule books are really bad about explaining like what do you actually do in this game? Because there are some systems that are very like, here's the setting, here's the rules, and that's it. And it's not really clear what are the players supposed to do? What is a realistic goal for my character in this system? And those may be times where you go look in other places. But if you're in that situation as a player, absolutely talk to your GM. Like, what is our goal for this game? And if they say, "Oh, well, it's up to you guys, whatever you want to do," it's like, okay, well, I need something here, guy, because I'm not sure what I'm supposed to expect to be doing in this.
Yeah.
But
But back to like accents and everything like that when you're like doing a voice, you if you want to take on like this is an entirely like different kind of character than what I normally like represent. This person is not me. You One of the things you do need to understand is that if other people at the table with you are also playing characters, do not get upset at the character's actions. Do not get upset at the player for the character's actions if they are like sticking true to a character. Don't take things personally, is what I'm trying to say. If someone is actively being a dick, yeah, that is a problem that you want to take care
yeah,
of.
if you're gonna be a player who's gonna be like, oh, but it's totally what my character would do, and you're stealing from the other players, killing the other players, um, doing general assholery, and you're hiding behind the guise of it's what my character would do. In bird culture, this is considered a dick move.
Yeah. And that like this isn't necessarily a common issue that I've run into. Um but I
Oh,
know that did you say you have?
I one day I will have the horror story episode, and I will
Yeah. Oh God.
I will
Uh
go.
God.
Yeah,
From based on my conversation with you, I don't know if we could if we could
very
watch that.
some parts of it would have to be censored. Very, very early GMing experience. Very little idea what I was doing. It was not great.
Yeah. But like if someone's being a dick, someone's being a dick. This expands to the GM. Not just because the GM, despite what some people believe, is a player. They are actively playing the game. They just have more responsibilities than the others. I know some people that say that's not true. The GM is their own entity. They are not a player at the table. I disagree because they are actively also there to have fun with the group and the game and the system. I will not name names for the sake of this is on the internet. Uh, and it's if the GM is crossing boundaries or doing things that could be viewed as a dick move or just terrible behavior overall that go against common decency, that's a problem. And that is a conversation that should be had with that person. If you are not comfortable having that conversation, likely are not comfortable should not be comfortable to play at that table because if you don't feel like you can have a dialogue with a person about hey you've crossed the line we need to talk about it, if you feel like that is going to have a negative impact on you as a person, you don't need to be at that table. That is me giving you telling you that is that's a safety thing. If you feel like that your mental health or even physical health, if you're playing at a table physically, is at risk if you bring up that someone is being a dick, get out. That is that
Yeah.
is not okay. This is a hobby that people are supposed to be having fun at. If you feel like someone is infringing on that fun, but feel like that if you speak up about it that you are in some amount of danger, get out. Get out. Get out. Cuz that's not okay. That's not what this is about. That's not what no. Um and like it's all right for you to play like my character is a bit of an asshole. As long as everyone in the group is aware, hey, my character's going to be a bit of a dick, but like in the fun way, like fun movie way. That's fine. If you're like, I'm going to stab players in their sleep because I can, it's what my character would do. Stop. You're you,
Yeah, I've played a massive asshole before. Um Terrible person. Deplorable being. A real monster. But we were playing vampire, so but
so just another character.
people were known going in. Oh, I mean, look, I'm a divecaster. I don't know if I like this.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I told people I was like, this is what I'm playing. He's gonna be kind of a dick, and I mean, everybody leaned hard into just being none of us are gonna get along. Like it's gonna be a mess, but we're gonna be
We're,
forced to get along because of the circumstances.
we're coworkers,
Um,
not friends.
Look, I mean, it was a party that consisted of a Zemesis on the Road of Sin, a Tremere on the Path of Blood, I'm pretty sure, um, and a Salubre on the Road of Heaven.
Jesus.
Yeah.
It's a hodgepodge of bullshit.
Yeah. Surprisingly, this was also during the Dark Ages. Um,
Okay.
After the Omen War, which involves the Zemisi and the Tremere, and laughably enough, it was the Zemisi and the Tremere who got along the most. And everybody else absolutely hated my character's guts. So, but it was fine.
But everyone was on board for that, which is the big thing.
Well, found out one player wasn't so on board with it, but they never said anything. So,
Part of the problem.
Yeah. But there's also some discussion there about buying into the game as well in that situation. Because there's some general vibe that the player may not have been entirely buying into the concept of a vampire game and what
Gotcha.
exactly that entailed. But that's history now. But like, yeah, you can absolutely play totally deplorable asshole person. You just need to do it right. And this wasn't a character that was going to be, betraying the party left, right, and center just because he didn't like them. It was very much a situation of we have to work together. And he was the kind of person where he did not actually believe in assassination. Like, sneakily just killing people and stuff was like deplorable to him.
Ew.
He's like, if you're going to kill somebody, they should be aware that you're there and it should be a proper like one-on-one fight if you're going to do like assassin type shit. He was not a cloak and dagger kind of guy. And they implied he was at one point, and he was so deeply insulted. So
And like,
yeah.
that's a character concept that, functions. And
Yeah.
let's talk about how sometimes you can be the only player at a table that's doing a certain thing. Sometimes you're the only character doing an accent or a voice. That's fine. If you're going to be self-conscious about it, and that's going to impact your fun, maybe don't do the voice or accent. Because if you're having fun otherwise, then, either stick with the voice and accent because, you're having fun, and, it's not really impeding on anyone else's fun. If someone says you doing an accent or a voice is impeding on their fun, they need a reality check, in my personal opinion.
I mean,
unless like you're
I will
talking,
say this.
unless you're talking like a clown the entire time, then
Yeah, if you're being really obnoxious with it, I think is where it can be a group can be like, hey, it's really detracting from the game. If you're doing a really like a literally like goofy ass voice, like if you're trying to do a more serious type game and one of the players has decided they want to talk in a Daffy Duck voice the entire time, that's probably going to be a point where the players in the GM is going to veto and be like, no, you can do a voice, but not that.
or a potential thing that could happen with that is everyone's just like, yes, that will be like our one source of comedy from this, dark, twisted reality that we're playing in. And
Which is also fair.
But that's a conversation that you, the GM, and the players have, and the rest of the players have to have. Is, hey, we're playing an uber serious game. I'm going to have the most obnoxious fucking lisp. I think it'd be funny. I'm still going to play a serious character. I just imagine a character giving a fucking reading the obituary of another individual with a Daffy Duck voice. And it could either be it could detract from the tone, which could be an issue, or it could be like the one source of like brevity that the players have is that it's like, hey, this is a super serious game, but when Chuck talks, it's hilarious. And him trying to be serious with the Daffy Duck voice is just a source of enjoyment for everybody. Could that detract from the tone of the game? Absolutely. If everyone's on board for it, then go for it. You don't. Not everybody has to be doing a voice or an accent. Is all I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
In order for you to do it, that doesn't have to happen. Those that hear me GM, I stick to certain accents. Primarily because those are the ones that I just kind of naturally slip into and can't quite help myself. Talk about the good old Southern drawl. But I mean, I do other accents at times. I just don't do them often. If you're wanting to get into doing accents, monkey see, monkey do. Go look up like podcasts for people speaking with those accents. The easiest ones you can jump into is doing other accents that natively speak English. So a British accent, southern drawl, Bostonian New York. The New York ones are always fun. So are the Boston ones.
Walking here.
I'm walking here. And just look up like even like podcasts that have like Irish and like Scottish speakers.
Yeah.
Because you can go watch Jacksepticeye. I don't know.
Yeah. It's also important to note, you don't, if you want to do a voice, you do not have to commit to one before you play the game.
No.
You can start playing and, experiment a little bit and decide, like, does it feel right? Does it feel wrong? Do you need to adjust it a little bit? You can adjust it a little bit. Like, in our Eclipse Phase game, I was, wanted to do a bit of a Southern accent, changed it up a little bit. And the next time we played, and I was like, that didn't feel right. And I kind of just brought it back to my closer to how I normally speak for the character and just decided to stick with that because Southern accent was feeling just a little too forced for the character. And I've done Southern accent before it with other characters, but it just wasn't sitting right with me on this character in the different ones I was doing. So you don't need to commit to a certain accent. And if you decide to like not do an accent or a voice at all after starting with one, you just be like, yeah, guys, they're just, I didn't really feel like it was appropriate and just stop doing it. Like when I was doing my gargoyle voice, the ST was like, hey, you don't have to do the voice. I was like, no, I want to do it. It's like, okay. And I was like, I'm just going to make sure I have more water available. Because I was fucking dying doing that voice, doing all the talking I did not think I was going to be doing. But I made my bed. I was gonna sleep in it.
Yeah. And like that's another thing to keep note if like you feel your accent flip. Because me myself, whenever I do a British accent, I feel myself slip into Southern. It happens. It's fine. You're not a professional voice actor. You don't need to feel like you don't have to feel obligated to constantly have that voice going. Especially if you're having conversations above the table. And what I mean by above the table is it's like you're talking to Tim about his day at work while the GM and Sarah are going on about her horrific backstory of living in an orphanage. As long as you're not like disrupting them, you're fine to have that side conversation. It's just harder to do it like in Discord, which is like the one thing that I kind of miss about playing in person is friends being able to sit there and have those conversations off to the side politely without disturbing everything. But the bright side is that everyone gets to do that in text chat and, post GIFs
Yeah.
to the reactions of shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you don't have to like, all right, I'm at the session, I can only speak with this accent or this voice. No, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that.
Yeah, some
um,
groups get pretty hardcore. They want to be in character 100% of the time once the story starts outside of very specific things. Um, that's really a preference thing.
yeah, I'm not
Like,
gonna tell you not
would
to do
I
that.
prefer to be in character 90% of the time? Yeah, but with our group, it just generally doesn't work that way. So it doesn't really bother me. But it's whatever works for your group. If something where the being in character all the time is really a deal breaker for you or whatever, obviously you just avoid those groups that don't match what you want.
Yeah. Um, and like part of making a character for a game and buying into the game is setting those boundaries of like, hey, I'm not okay with this. Can we avoid this subject matter? That's just part of playing the game, especially nowadays, where people are more cognizant of those issues and a dialogue is allowed to happen for that. You go back 20, 30 years ago, it was just like, get over it. That's not the case anymore. That's not the landscape we operate in. If you feel uncomfortable, you know, bring it up off to the side in a polite and respectful manner. And as long as they respect your decisions and respect you, they'll be like, okay, we'll adjust. Didn't mean to like most people are not looking to push your buttons on things and like try to cross those boundaries. The one place where I would say you need to be mindful of like, hey, your buttons are going to get pressed are horror games. Those are purposely designed around the concept of invoking fear and making you uncomfortable. Now, does that mean that a horror game needs to have SA in it? No, it doesn't. That's that's a line that shouldn't be crossed unless everybody's on board with it. And even then, doing it tastefully is difficult. Cuz, how do you tastefully represent SA? Um and certain subject matters, especially in horror games, do come up, like body horror. There are a number of people that are not okay with body horror. Um, or like particular parts of body horrors, like the most common one that I know of is eyes. Um, just think of the scene from Dead Space is my suggestion.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people not okay with that.
One's a double whammy because it's eyes and needles.
Yeah, it is a double whammy. And a lot of people are not okay with that, but it's a horror game, so those buttons being pushed are to be somewhat expected. If you go, I'm not okay with any of my buttons being pressed like that, horror games aren't for you. And that's not a bad thing. It's just, it's a genre that you are not going to mesh well with. Because those things will likely get brought up because those things are scary. Same thing with like existentialism. If you are not okay with existentialism, avoid Call of Cthulhu and Delta Green. Because those are very common, easy concepts to look into and play around. Or like, it's just a thing to be mindful of. Is there are times where you saying, "Hey, I'm not okay with that," is just like you're not supposed to be. That's part of the horror game. If you're playing something like D&D, and it's just like, hey, there's a lot of body horror going on. then it's more reasonable for you to go like this. It wasn't like this wasn't sold to me as a horror-esque D&D game. Could we tone this down? And that's a conversation that has to happen.
Yeah.
You just saying no, I don't want that is not a reasonable expectation for it to stop. Because just saying no, I don't want it is one thing, but a dialogue does need to occur of like, okay, what is it that you're not getting at that's getting at you? That way we can adjust to still kind of talk about this if it's relative to the plot. Like, if the big bad evil guy has massacred a village because they're a big bad evil guy, then either the depictions of that need to be dialed back. We can't just say, well, then it never happened.
Yeah.
Like there is a level of, hey, that's not okay to talk about, not okay to have in the system. There's a level of that, absolutely. But there are certain times where these depictions are meant to drive things forward or to hammer a concept in that, hey, the person you're dealing with shouldn't be viewed as a person. They are a monster.
Yeah. There
Um
are also differing ideologies on this. There are some people who are of the mind that when using safety tools, if you X card something as an example to indicate like something is a no go, um, that they will rewind to before that thing happened so that it can be played as if that thing didn't happen. Some groups are fine with doing that. Not every group is fine with doing that. So this is why I will say it is very important if there are things that are absolutely icks, things you cannot handle being in the game. Like it's one thing for like, ew, gross. Ugh. It's another thing to be like, I need to not be playing if this comes up. You should say something at the beginning of the game. Like you need to communicate like, hey, you know, maybe either you or someone you know or whatever has dealt with SA. If you know, you know. And you can't handle that being like a theme or even something that comes up because you don't want that in your escapism. Let that be known at the beginning of the game, you know, during that session 0 with the GM, and it can be in private, be like, hey, I really need this to not come up. And just future proof the game from those kinds of things. Because I will say it is as much as we want our players to be comfortable, it can really put a GM in a really awkward situation if there is like heavy plot stuff happening and you try to go, no, I don't like that. That can't be here. And now they're in the middle of this situation and now suddenly they have to change things. That is hard for a lot of GMs to handle where they have to suddenly change something significant on the fly like that. And you know, sometimes circumstances lead to that situation happening. And you know, there was a story I heard on another podcast where they were doing a thing and it was revealed that, you know, the big bad was like this AI thing, and one of the players groaned and was like, of course it was, or whatever. And turns out the player was just like really tired about AI stuff. And so the GM had to completely change what it was on the fly. And it's just so you know, situations happen where you may not necessarily be able to let somebody know beforehand, but you really should do your best to do so. Because it can be rough. And the reality is similar to what we were talking about earlier. If the group feels like whatever the thing is super integral to what the game is, it might just be a situation of, well, then we don't think this game is for you. And you might have to step away from the game. Um, you know, if I'm For example, if I'm running Vampire the Masquerade and we're doing a Sabbat invasion storyline where there are Zamisi, there's going to be a lot of body horror. There's going to be a lot of gross shit. There's going to be abominations of like fused bodies and all kinds of things. It's going to be awful. If you really can't handle body horror, I'm just going to straight up tell you, you're not going to have a place in this game. Because this is the game I'm running. Because if you're going to try to tell me that I have to run a Sabbat invasion storyline without Zamisi horrors, so essentially without like one of like the iconic parts of the Sabbat, well, why am I even running a Sabbat invasion at that point? And if that's the game I want to run, I might be willing to drop a player and run the game I want to run, then completely change the game that I want to run. So it goes back to that, do what you have to do to be safe and comfortable for yourself, but do not expect other people to bend over backwards for you.
Yeah.
They are not beholden to you in that way. If they try to keep you trapped in the game and continue to make you uncomfortable, like if they say, oh, they'll make changes, but all they do is just continue to make you uncomfortable, regardless of your wishes, that's another thing entirely. They're being dicks, and you should just leave because they're not respecting you. But they're totally within their right, like, to be like, this is how we're having fun. If it's not fun for you, then we're going to have to ask you to leave because this is what we want to do. That's totally reasonable for them to do. I understand some people might get mad at that because, fear of missing out, but, you can't hold other people hostage to your own needs and wants.
It's not reasonable.
Yeah.
And like this is especially prevalent for whenever you're doing like looking for games or whatever the service is called where you can sign up to play in things. Because at that point you're actively spending money to be a part of a game that someone is GMing. If they go, no, this is what I'm running, then you just shop around for something else. Like at that point you're a consumer and, the hat doesn't quite fit right or the shirt is too baggy kind of deal. You as a consumer, you have the right as a consumer to go, well, if your product's not going to change, I'm going to just go elsewhere to spend my money. You're able to do that with looking for games or whatever the fuck it's called. And that's fine. It's the only time that this really becomes like a bigger like issue is whenever you have like a pre-established group like ours and someone's like, I'm going to run a thing and this is what I'm running. These are the things that you should expect. If someone goes, I would love to play, but I need you to remove this part of the game. So like a horror game that has like existentialism. Well, I'm running Call of Cthulhu. I'm not going to remove that. Like if that's the concept I'm wanting to run, because I have 4 other people who are down to explore that and 1 person who's not. If the majority of the group's like, no, I don't want to do that, then it's a concept I put in my pocket for another play group or something else. But if the rest of the group is like, hey, we want to clown around with existential dread, and one person's like, hey, I don't, it's just like, well, then you probably don't want to be a part of the game. Doesn't mean that like I can't be friends with them anymore. Doesn't mean that I can't run something for them in the future. It just means that game's not for them. Don't take it personally unless someone is actively pulling you into games. You saying, hey, I don't want this. They go, cool, I'll adjust, and then they don't. That's when like someone's not respecting your boundaries as a person, and that's when you should be like, okay, now this is an issue. Don't take it that way immediately. If they're like, hey, this is what I'm running. If you don't want to deal with this, don't play. That's just a matter of fact. There's polite ways to say it, sure. But when you boil things down to, I'm running a horror game, I'm running this kind of game, and it's going to have these themes in it. and these are non-negotiable themes, and you go, cool, I don't want that, then the answer is don't play. Plain and simple. Yeah, you have that fear of missing out, sure. But there's always at this point there's always that constant fear of missing out on something. I mean, entire markets are driven on it.
Yeah.
Um, and you either have to be okay with that or be okay with those subject matters that make you uncomfortable. And if depending on that subject matter, I think you're just better off missing out if it's going to affect your mental health. Like
Absolutely.
you have to police your own mental health at that point. And do what's best for you. Um, and like that's just something that you have to be aware of when you're making a character. Trying to see what else we should discuss because we have the picking a concept, making a concept that meshes with the game, making a concept that meshes with the group, connecting your concepts to other people's concepts, and then like being on the lookout for things that you know you aren't as a player down for.
Yeah.
Um,
I think another major aspect for when you are kind of going back to concepts a bit, something really important to do is to figure out what exactly it is your character wants. Give them a driving goal. Um, and it might also be something worth breaking down into multiple goals.
yeah,
Have a, maybe grand goal that may or may not be achievable within the campaign. And it's totally fine to pick something that they will never be able to achieve. Because just because you as a player know they will never be able to achieve it does not mean the character knows and may still push on regardless. And that can be a very character defining thing. But also having smaller things that are achievable so that the character, both you as a player and both the character, can feel like they're making progress. Um, it's one thing to make like just a fighter who grew up in a small town or whatever and learned how to fight and is now running around doing adventurous stuff. It's another thing to be a fighter who um maybe inadvertently has a kid he doesn't know about somewhere, and is uh maybe as he's getting older is realizing like, man, this world is rough. And maybe I should like be actually like trying to affect a change in some way. Um, or maybe you're playing somebody who beforehand has no interest in magic, but as they're getting older, they're starting to realize like, time's running out, and they start doing the, maybe I can achieve immortality. Or there's all kinds of things you could do, but giving your character goals within the context of the setting, um, giving them some sort of notion of the world and maybe how that might change through play. Very common one, playing the naive character at the beginning. Very hopeful, bushy tailed, bright eyed, you know, naive to the realities of the world. And through the story, can become jaded and disappointed and disillusioned with reality. And there's a lot of different ways you can play with that. But, be thinking about ways your character can change and kind of try to shape your character in such a way so that they can change. Because that's another thing is if you make a character who will not change no matter what, nobody can convince them otherwise or whatever, it's going to be harder for other player characters in the role play to invest time in your character with interactions and stuff. Because if your character's inflexible, why would they continue to try to help them in some way? Like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to try to interact with you a couple times. And if it's like talking to a wall every time, I'm just going to stop doing it. Because this is a game. We're here to have fun. And if I can't make any kind of progress in interacting with your character after a few attempts, I'm not going to keep trying the same thing over and over and over and over again. Ultimately, the story in role playing games moves faster than it does in the real world. Because pretty much anybody will tell you the real world is exhausting. Like, is it realistic for you to overcome X thing in like the course of a few days with the help of your friends? No, not really. We know that's not how like mental shit works.
Yeah.
But does it make for better storytelling and like is it more enjoyable? Yes. Because you may not want to role play over the course of a real world year trying to get somebody to like overcome, I don't know, a fear of spiders so you can go clear a dungeon. That's probably not going to be fun. I don't know. Maybe some groups would find that enjoyable for a year, but I wouldn't. I'd want to blow my brains out, to be honest. I'd be like, this group is not for me. I'm out. We're not making any progress.
And like that's just something to at all points just kind of keep in mind. Is your character is around for a reason. They're interacting with the story for a reason. What is that reason? And knowing what that reason is informs other decisions about your character. Why are you why did why did the hobbits leave the Shire to go take this ring and throw it into a volcano?
Well, that's why Frodo left.
That's why Frodo left. But why did the others leave too?
Sam wasn't going to let his, his master Frodo go off by himself. He wanted to make sure he was safe. And then, Pippin and Merry. I mean, they're in for an adventure. Realistically, like, sure, they want to go with their friends as well to, make sure they're okay. But they also are like, they're going on an adventure. We want to go on an adventure. Like, they have different motivations. And like, using Lord of the Rings as an example, all of those characters change across the entire story. Merry and Pippin both kind of to a degree learn about responsibility throughout the story. Through their own shenanigans and such. Sam and Frodo learn their own lessons. Well, I don't know if I'd say. What? I don't know if there's a specific lesson Frodo learned. Oh, no, there it was. He learned about, sparing others. For sure. But, they do change over time. And when I say, like, you shouldn't take too long for your character to change, I'm not saying they need to change as soon as somebody's, like, trying to help them, but because you don't want it to be too fast either, because if it's way too fast, it feels really unnatural and rushed. There should at least be incremental change. Sam over time becomes more and more aggressive to Golem, as an example.
He goes from someone that's just along for the ride to it's like, oh, I want to help, to being an actual like protector. He sees a threat and he like, hey, I need to step in. I need to. I can't be a bystander.
Yeah, got to be there for Mr. Frodo. And so like these are things to think about for when you're preparing to play a character, what are things that are like deep rooted beliefs or whatever? Like if change is going to be an active thing, what are deep rooted beliefs? For example, a very common talking point that comes up with characters is playing the racist character, especially in games like D&D, where it's
Yeah.
fantasy races. There's that degree of separation. Is it okay to play a racist character? The question is, it depends on your group. And it's one of those things where I'm absolutely of the mind, if you're going to play a racist character, you need to go in with the understanding that your character is going to change. Because, assuming you're playing with sane people, they're going to be like, yeah, racism is bad. And they're going to want to change your character's mind. So you need to be open to your character having their mind changed. But obviously, that is something that is probably going to be a deep rooted belief, and it's going to take time. But you can have it take time and still do it in such a way that there is incremental change so that the players can see that they're getting through, like the players and the other characters can see that they are getting through to you. It's going to be an ongoing effort. It is not something simply solved in a couple sessions.
Yeah. A perfect example, going back to Lord of the Rings, um, Gimli and Legolas.
Yeah.
Like that is an arc that happens over 3 movies, 3 books of the line at the very end, that kind of like cement everything was, "I never thought I'd die side by side to an elf." And Legolas turns and is like, "Well, how about dying side by side with a friend?" And Gimli's like, "I'll take that. That sounds good." And it's not like, oh, their racism is cured. No, they both were operating off of like, hey, there's this group of people that like I don't agree with because of actions of like the general populace. That's where,
Yeah, that wasn't exactly extreme racism or anything. There was
yeah,
definitely stereotypes and generational beef there, but it wasn't hardcore racism.
no, yeah.
Uh,
Because that's a hard subject to really role play tastefully. Um,
yeah,
and it's a concept that like I've thought about running down, but it's just like it just feels ick. Not saying that it can't be done, it but like it's a thing that you have to be aware of as a player that you're not going to. It's not a realistic expectation of playing a worldly character for them to maintain those beliefs.
yeah,
Um, it just isn't. There's in in our own real world, there are examples where people who opened up to like this group of people that they like thought were that they were racist against, where as they had exposure to these other cultures and groups, those went away. Like the boundary that they built up in their mind was broken down by increased interaction with those groups.
yep,
I don't remember the names of the individuals, but there was a like leader of the KKK who like was talking to like a black reporter and like had a meeting, and both of them were very nervous at first, and like a car backfired, they both got very tense and then laughed about it once they realized what had happened. And from there they built a relationship over 10 years where the one guy was just like, this isn't right. Why do I have these beliefs? I'm stepping down. Like I'm not, this is wrong.
yeah,
What I everything I believed was wrong. Um and like those are things that happen in real life. They happen. Now, do we hear those talked about very often? No, because it doesn't always happen because most people with those mindsets aren't looking to challenge them, aren't looking to open that door up. Um and that, I mean, that's an entirely different conversation, and this isn't a political podcast. Um but your character is an adventurer 9 times out of 10. They are part of something that's going to have them experience more of the world, and they're going to probably consistently have their beliefs challenged. in my personal opinion, a good story will look at a character's beliefs and it's just like, okay, how can we challenge this belief? How can we challenge this concept? Um, and either the person will become more deeply rooted in whatever they believe, or their beliefs will change. Um, and if you're playing a racist character, those are your two options as well. One of those is tasteful, one of those isn't.
Yeah.
Um, and like there are problematic. I think that'd be a different talk to have of playing problematic concepts.
Oh yeah, sure. This is more the point of here's an identifiable, like this is not something that can be fixed in a short term way, but it is something where realistically you could gauge making a dent in that kind of problematic ideology, um, so that players aren't like annoyed with like trying to deal with your character and being like, why do we even bring them with us? To instead we are slowly like helping him realize that he's wrong.
Yeah,
Um, and like as long as everybody in the group is down with how you're portraying it and everything, and you know it proceeds at a reasonable pace, it should be fine. But it's absolutely like if you do want to play a character that has some like really problematic views for the explicit purpose of changing, like I said, if you're gonna do that, go in with the intention of changing throughout the game. Make sure everybody's on board with that. Because some
yeah,
people may just be like, I deal with enough of this shit in real life. Don't want to deal with it in my game. And that's fine.
that's fair.
Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely something you want to talk about. Definitely do not go in and be like, I'm going to play a racist character and they're never going to change their mind and they're just going to be a piece of shit the entire time. People aren't going to want to play with you.
Yeah. Um, and like that's an entire conversation in the habit of itself. Is that do you have a player at the table with problematic views that no one is jiving with? That's a different conversation that has to happen, and it will likely need to happen. Because it's not unusual for players to sit there and talk outside of the game, and if this problematic behavior is popping up, I mean, problematic players is going to be its own conversation. It's going to be its own recording for the GM Grimoire series, and we I would recommend people listen to it. Um, but if you are playing a problematic concept, you need to have everyone's consent. Um, because some people do not want to deal with it in their escapism, and that's fair. And if you find yourself consistently trying to find someone who's going to let you play a problematic concept and no one says yes, you need to find a different concept to play. If you're only willing to play problematic concepts, that's problematic. Because then you're looking to rock the boat when the boat doesn't need rocked. Um,
Yep.
which yeah, look inward for that. What else? I think we've covered we've covered a few things outside of basic character concepts at this point.
Yeah. I would say general advice for approaching any system. Um, do your due diligence. Um, if you're agreeing to play a game, actually like open the book, look at how it works, understand how to roll things to some degree. Like, depending on how your group dynamic is, maybe it's normal for your group to be like, and the GM teaches everybody how to play entirely. and maybe that works for your group, but like if you're playing in a especially dense system, do you, your group, and your GM a favor, open the book, do some reading. Like, you have time for a tabletop in your life. You probably have downtime in other parts of your life. Or if you don't have that conversation with the group and be like, I don't have a lot of time to actually like read the rules and stuff. If you can just help me along when I need it, stuff like that. But like, make an effort. Because I've seen a lot of times online GMs going asking for advice because we've been playing D&D 5e for 4 years and I have a player who still doesn't know how to make an attack roll. What do I do? Don't be that guy. And by that guy, I mean do not be that player who's going to play the same game for 4 years and still not know how to do a very basic part of the system. Even if it's other players are helping teach you play the game, actually listen and absorb that information. Like, yes, it's a hobby. It's supposed to be fun, but it's not fun every session having to explain to somebody who refuses to learn the rules over and over and over again how to do basic things. It gets exhausting and it slows the game down. And honestly, the rest of the group is totally in the right to remove you from the game if you refuse to learn the rules. That's totally fair and valid because you're not keeping up with the experience they want to have. And it's honestly one of those things where if you're somebody who doesn't want to learn the rules, they may stop inviting you to games in general if it's a group of friends. Because if you're just that person who will never learn the rules, they may decide it's better off to not invite you because you're not going to put in the effort that they want. So, you know, do your due diligence as much as you can. This isn't saying you need to be 100% on all the rules all the time. It's just, there's an expectation that when you play an amount of time, you're going to actually learn how to play the game. If you sit down to play Monopoly with a group of people and every time it comes to your turn, it's like, okay, how do I move again? And somebody has to explain you roll 2 dice, you add the numbers together, that's how many spaces you move. Every time it's your turn. People don't want to play Monopoly with that person.
Yeah.
That's the example I'm giving here. There's a degree of you need to learn the game as a player. It does become, especially when you're playing the same system for a long time, it becomes very frustrating when a player refuses to learn the system. And it may not even be a conscious refusal, but it's still irritating. Because at the end of the day, you're most likely an adult, and you not learning to some extent is a choice. There are all kinds of tools and stuff to help you remember. There are cheat sheets out there that you can download. You could make your own cheat sheets of the rules. There's, all kinds of things you could do to help yourself, to keep track of things, to help you remember how things work or what to do and all of that. Take advantage of them. Do not put all the onus of playing your character on everybody else at the table.
Yeah, that's not okay.
Yeah. I mean, hell, with D&D, they have so many tools. I mean, they fucking spell cards. I think there's ability cards out there now. Like, I mean, you can essentially have all of the text for all of your abilities in a neat little pile of cards with you every time you play. And then you could literally just get a cheat sheet of the basic rules. There's absolutely those for D&D 5th. there are those for a ton of other systems as well. Like, there are so many resources out there, you literally just have to go look for them. You will find them.
Yeah.
Unless you're playing something super obscure. Then, might be a little rougher, but if there is a thriving community, I guarantee you will probably find resources if you go look. Other than that, ends of sessions. If the GM asks for feedback, give feedback. If they ask for feedback in a really bad way, then be like, hey, maybe don't ask in that way.
Yeah.
We talked about that a little bit in our GM Grimoire episode. About asking for proper feedback. But if the GM does ask you, like, what was your least favorite part of the session, maybe be like, if there wasn't a least favorite part, just be like, well, there really wasn't a least favorite part. Like, I liked all of it. Because that's asking for bad advice, because they're going to end up causing people to try to look for something to be wrong when something wasn't necessarily wrong. So, but if, you play a session and something isn't jiving with you, or something really stuck out with you as something you did not like, maybe there was a way the GM handled a certain situation in the game from like a mechanical standpoint, or maybe just generally how the GM is running the game, something's rubbing you the wrong way, you should feel empowered as a player to have a conversation with the GM, either with the rest of the group or in a one-on-one, whatever you're more comfortable with, but have that conversation and be like, yeah, I really didn't like X because of Y and Z. And have that conversation, and that can either lead to things changing or eventually lead to realizing like the expectations and desires of what this game is just doesn't line up between you and the rest of the group. That can happen. But having those conversations can help clear that up and make it clearer whether or not the situation can change for the better or for you to walk away from the table. And it doesn't need to be with hard feelings. Just people have different yums.
Yeah.
Don't yuck other people's yums unless their yums is, well, I'm not going to go there. But so long as their yums are nothing like, illegal, don't yuck other people's yums.
But I think that's where we'll call it here. Just quick synopsis. Make sure that you work out with the GM and other character what your character concept is going to be, and don't be a dick.
Yeah, similarly to the first GM Grimoire episode. Communicate, communicate, communicate.
Don't be a dick.
Don't be a dick.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, as long as you communicate, you can get through. I have had one experience where communication was actually like just bad, and player ended up not playing with the group, but it was probably for the best. But yeah, just don't be, if you're gonna, when you communicate, just don't be a dick. You cannot hold the group hostage. Like, you do it my way only. No, don't be a dick. Communicate.
It's just, yeah, that's just not a reasonable expectation.
Yeah, that one particular situation. Not to go too far into it, and not to name names or anything. It's nobody you knew. But they were like, they technically weren't doing anything wrong. They were like, I really do not want, I don't want, like assholes in the party or whatever. They were trying to set these lines out. But they're like, it isn't going to work with me if you do this or whatever. And it was written in a way that it was like kind of like really like passive aggressive / like getting aggressive. Um, and it was said after we already had session 0 and we already laid out the expectations of the group dynamic. Like, these are going to be characters that aren't necessarily going to be the best of friends. And it was set up to be open, like, we could fucking hate each other, but we're in a situation where we have to work together. So, like, everybody's making characters on the assumption that we need to be cooperative to a degree, even if we don't agree with each other as characters. So that conversation was already had. And they came in like a week after that conversation, or like a couple days after that conversation. I can't remember. And like in the middle of a work day, like in the morning of a work day, and was like wall of text, this kind of like attitude.
The 44
And
rules.
was like, well, it was just like this wall of text of, I don't want assholes in the group, I don't want to deal with this shit in a game or whatever. And it's like, I mean, it was totally fair stuff, but it was all in how it was worded. And it was after we had already had this discussion, and was like, as long as that's okay with everybody. And then like nobody responded because everybody was at fucking work. And they waited like an hour and a half after that was sent and was like, okay, I'm not playing in this game. And they left.
Wild.
It's like, holy shit. 1, we already had this conversation. 2, what's with the attitude? Has somebody done something? Nobody's like said anything crazy here. Like, nobody said anything that we're implying to do. We actually talked about all of our character concepts, and none of the concerns that they raised was actually going to be a problem. And 3, they didn't get a response in the amount of time that they wanted in the middle of a work day, of a work week. It was like a Tuesday or something like that. Like 10 in the morning. Nobody's responding to you right now. We're all working. We have jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's an example of communication done badly. Don't be that person. Communicate. Don't be a dick. If you take nothing else away from this episode, take away
Don't be a
that.
dick.
Don't be a dick. Communicate.
But I think we'll call it there, and thank you, everybody, for listening, and you have a good one. Bye.
Yes. Bye-bye.